everyone. Welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to talk about money. And in some previous podcasts, we've talked about the function of money, and we've talked about the types of money. And in this one, we're actually going to talk about what I might call the definition of money, or what money really is in a modern economy. And in a modern economy, money typically is fiat money, but there's a little bit more to it than that. It's actually much harder if you want to try to add up all the money that you have in your country. It's actually much harder than it first sounds. So first of all, what we're thinking of here is sometimes what you call the money stock, or what I'm going to call the money supply. So we want to know, what is the money supply? What's the amount of money that's out there for people to spend? And it seems like you could just go, I mean, it wouldn't be necessarily an easy thing to do, but just theoretically, it's not a hard concept. You could just go add up all the dollars that people have, and that seems like it'd be a straightforward thing, even though it would take a long time and might be kind of hard to carry out. Theoretically, it's a pretty simple idea. Just go count all the money, okay? But so we just want to know the quantity of all the money that's out there circulating. So theoretically, we just go count it all. But it turns out that it's really not that easy, because you get into the question of, sorry about that, you get into the question of what exactly gets counted as money. What do we count as money? So one thing that's easy to count as money would be currency. Currency is easy to count as money, obviously, and we define currency, by the way, as paper bills and coins in the hands of the non-bank public. So this is dollar bills and quarters and dimes and nickels and all the paper bills and coins that all of us are carrying around. That's obvious. That's currency, and that's obviously part of the money supply. So that's at least theoretically easy to go count. But then things get more complicated, because I could go to the grocery store and I could buy my groceries and give the grocery store $50. That would be one way to do it. But I could also write them a check. I could also write a check. And so the next thing that we could call money are what are called demand deposits, or just what most people call checking accounts. Balances in banks on which a check can be written. Now, isn't that money? I mean, I go to the grocery store and I write a check for $50 and they give me groceries. I mean, that sure kind of feels like money. And remember, one of the characteristics we said of money is that it's used with regularity. So yeah, I mean, this isn't real regular, but people still do it. You go to the grocery store, you write a check, and you walk out with your groceries. Now, the key to this, and when we start to think about should we call checking accounts money, the key to it is to ask the question of liquidity. Well, cash, currency, is pure liquidity. It is the medium of exchange. Checking accounts are a little less liquid. They're a little less liquid. That is to say, some places won't accept checks. Maybe if you go and get gas, they might not accept a check in return for the purchase of gas. So you wouldn't be able to use it under those conditions, whereas they would accept cash. So checking accounts are a little less liquid than cash, but we still typically, we're going to think of them as checking accounts as being liquid enough to call it money. So typically we are going to call currency, we're going to count that as money, and checking accounts, yep, we're going to count that as money too. We're going to call those things money. So when we add up all the money, we're going to add up all the currency in the country, and we're going to add up all the checking accounts in the country, because that's all money that people have available to spend. That's all called money. All right? But just keep in mind that checking account is less liquid than the currency. We did say that. All right, savings accounts. Do we count savings accounts as money? Well, savings accounts are like checking accounts in the sense that it's in the bank, but you can't write checks on the savings accounts. And so they're a little bit less liquid than the demand deposits, than the checking accounts. They're a little bit less liquid. So now if I want to go buy something and I have money in my savings account, well, now if I want to write a check, I got to stop by the Mac machine and transfer money, or I got to get on my phone and transfer money over into the checking account, and then I can write the check. So, are we going to call savings accounts money? Well, I'm going to put a question mark there for now. And then there'd be other things. There's a lot of other things that we can include here. One of them is money markets. So money markets is, instead of putting your money into a checking account or a savings account at the bank, you could put your money with a mutual fund company. And the mutual fund company will hold your money in the form of what is called a money market. And a money market, it's kind of like money in a way, because you can write checks on it. Lots of money market accounts, however, will only let you write checks that are $500 or larger. So that means if you want to go to the grocery store and buy $50 of groceries, well, they're not going to let you do that. And so it's not quite as liquid as is a checking account. So currency, pure liquidity. Checking accounts are pretty liquid. Savings accounts are a little less liquid. And then money markets are still a little bit less liquid. So what gets counted as money? That really becomes the question. What is the definition of money? And when we ask what is money, it really comes down to whether or not an asset is going to get counted as money or not. Depends on the liquidity. The more liquid it is, the more sure we are that we're going to say that's money. That's why I said currency. Checking accounts, I said they're liquid assets. I'm going to call them money. All right? My house, that is not a liquid asset. I am not going to call it money. Okay? You cannot easily turn my house into a medium of exchange. Now, savings accounts, money markets, they're pretty liquid, and that's why I got the question mark here. Should I call them money or not? So we got to think about whether or not things are liquid enough to call them money. All right, so typically in the United States, we really have two definitions of money. We have what we call the M1 money, and we add up all the M1 money and call that the M1 money supply. And that's a very narrow definition. It is made up of stuff that is extremely liquid, like we have up here. And then we have a more broad definition of money, which is what we call M2 money, and we add all that up and we get the M2 money supply. And this includes some things that are less liquid. This includes some things that are less liquid. So let's define this more carefully. Here's our definition of fiat money in the modern United States economy. M1 money is made up of currency held outside of the banks. That's what we talked about up here. And checkable deposits. That's what we talked about up here. So if we add up all the value of all the currency, and we add up all the value of all the checking accounts, and we add them all together, we get a number. And that number is called the M1 money supply. That's called the M1 money supply. And then that's a narrow liquid definition of money. And then we have the M2 money supply. The M2 money supply is everything that's in M1, so currency and checking accounts, but then it also includes some less liquid things, like a savings account, like small time deposits. It might include things like certificates of deposit and money markets. And we add all those together, and that'll give me the M2 money supply. That'll give me the M2 money supply. So there's two definitions of money. There's two ways to add up or calculate the money supply. The first one is to say the money supply is M1. It's all the currency and checking deposits all added together that people can then use to go buy goods and services. Or we say it's the M2 money supply, and the M2 money supply includes everything in M1 plus some of these less liquid things, but they're still available for us to go out and buy goods and services. That is called the M2 money supply. So we have the M1 money supply, the M2 money supply, and what we need to talk about next is, in the United States, who's in charge of managing all of this money supply, this M1, M2 money that is out there. We'll talk about that on a future podcast. All right, this has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.